Good evening. Thank you. Good evening. See, I've been hanging out with Africans, and they are very responsive. I'm Swanee Hunt. I direct the Women and Public Policy program, and I work along with a terrific staff there. We founded the program about 10 or so years ago, and it is a joy to greet you. One of our primary initiatives is working on women and security. And this is an initiative that was actually birthed at the Kennedy School and has since taken on a much more robust life. And I look out and I see so many friends from different sectors of the government and of governments. And so I know that we are having an effect. And I also know that the speakers this evening are a big draw. So that is evidenced by the crowd all the way up to the rafters. What we're looking at here is the role of women in peace building. You can think of it as the role of women in war and peace. Now, normally people think of women and war and they immediately go to the V word, victims. Oh, those poor women. Oh, war is really horrible on women. Oh, World War I, 10% of the victims were civilians, and nowadays in war, it's 90% of the victims. And every time you use that word victim, there is a little bit more power that goes out of a woman. And my experience when I was ambassador in Vienna, and I see someone here who was in our political and intelligence section. When I was ambassador in Vienna, I had the opportunity to host negotiations between two parts of the warring factions in Bosnia. And as you know, Bosnia is about 4 million people, the size of Maryland, and we had 150,000 people killed there. So if you can imagine that happening in the state of Maryland, for example. And so we had two sessions of negotiations. One lasted, I'm going to say, about 8 days, another one 13 days. And then the agreement was reached. This was 1 year before the Dayton Agreement. And we got two sides of the war together, and then Dayton pulled the rest together to stop the war. And at the end of these negotiations, we went over to the White House for the signing, and there were the president of Croatia, the president of Bosnia, and the president of the United States. And they were standing up there on the stage, about to sign these wonderful agreements. And I looked around in the auditorium, and it was, no offense guys, but it was a sea of gray suits. And I thought, how on earth did I, as the host of these negotiations, how could I have let this happen? I mean, it is just inconceivable to me that I let this happen. In Colorado, I had helped start a women's foundation. I mean, people thought of me as a real organizer, and it didn't dawn on me. It just didn't dawn on me that I should have done something different. And then I immediately started feeling sorry for myself and said, oh, I bet you I was just being culturally sensitive, and that there aren't really women who would have been qualified for this position. And then come to find out that Yugoslavia had the highest percentage of women PhDs of any country in Europe. So that didn't work. Anyway, so I was just generally miserable about it, and then not too long after that, about a year later, came to the Kennedy School. And I was sitting here in this space at a table having lunch with Dean Joe Nye. And he's an international relations guru. So I was telling him my story. And he said, that's really interesting. I wonder if there's some more there, I said, well, listen, what do you mean? He said, well, I wonder if there's a trend, because I can't think of women on negotiating teams either. It's really easy to think of women in rape camps, right? Or women being slaughtered in massacres, but I can't think of any women on negotiating teams. So, he said, why don't you take a look at that? So not long afterwards, I was at the UN, and I asked about this. I said, how come there aren't any women on the negotiating teams in Africa? And the UN official said, oh, Ambassador Hunt, the warlords refuse to have women because they're afraid they'll compromise. And I thought, oh my gosh, what if that were true? What if that were true? What if women would find a way, if there were enough of them, not just one, but if there were a critical mass, as we say, what if they would find a way to stop a war a week earlier? Can you imagine a week in Iraq? Can you imagine what that costs? What if they could actually stop it a year sooner? What if they could prevent a war? And out of that inquiry came this whole notion of, should we be including women, maybe, in the peace process? Should policymakers be funding them? Should hosts like me be requiring that they be at the table during negotiations? Maybe so. So we invited a large group of women, 110 women in '99. We invited them here from 10 conflicts just to see if maybe it wasn't just a Bosnian experience. And sure enough, the women leaders from all of these conflicts, they were sharing their strategies with each other. They were saying, oh, thank God I'm not alone. But the other thing they were doing is pointing out the challenges that they face in terms of why it's so hard for them to have their voices heard. It's a really instructional time, and since then, we've been inviting groups of women from conflict areas every year. And you know what? They've actually been assuming higher positions. One of them, or 4 of them, are now foreign ministers. And one of them was elected the president of Liberia. And so we have very high expectations for every one of you on this stage, and the other 20 or so women who are here with us from Liberia, Afghanistan, Haiti, Israel, Palestine, Colombia, and Iraq. Now, when we talk about security, let me just define a couple of terms. The Canadians launched the idea of human security, and that was picked up by the UN. It's a wonderful expansion to say security, yes, it's about bombs, stop the bombs, it's about bullets, but it's also beyond bombs and bullets. I mean, as one woman I talked to said, so tell me the difference between my daughter being killed by a grenade and her being gang raped and then her throat slit. Now explain the difference. Or my 6-year-old dying of starvation. Explain the difference to me. And so that's why we've expanded this whole idea of security to say it includes economic opportunity, it includes education, it includes being able to have a decent life worth living. How do you get to human security? You think of human security as this broad expanse, and then think about a funnel on top. And what we call inclusive security is that funnel, because you get there by including all the stakeholders. That's the women who have been shut out, it's indigenous people who aren't included, it's people who are the marginalized. And if you can bring those people together and let them funnel the ideas into the peace process, you'll end up with human security. Because women will come with a different way of operating, yes, but also with different life experiences, different perspectives, and often different priorities. So those are the concepts we have here, and I have the great honor of introducing to you the women whom you'll see described in your programs. I'm only going to say a very quick word, but let me note, as I introduce you all, but let me note that if you're talking about stopping a war, to have all the generals who have been leading the war gathered around a table and expecting them to solve the problems, I mean, it's nothing short of bad casting, right? And this is really good casting here. And so I want to introduce now General Oran of Israel, who was the Deputy National Security Advisor, which means that she was in the very hub of the decision-making in Israel's defense mechanism from 1999 through 2002. And the way we're going to structure this is each of our guests, I'll introduce you right before you speak, and then they're going to just say a few minutes, 5 to 10 minutes about their own experience. And then we're going to have a conversation among them, and then I'll open it up to you all for questions, all right? And we're going to be out by 7:30. All right, General.
Good evening to everybody. Thank you for inviting me, speaking to you. And I was instructed by the real general here, Ambassador Hunt, to tell a personal story. So I chose to talk about my decision to stay in the military and then to be a soldier in the peace forces. I decided to stay in the military after the 73 war, which is called in Israel the Yom Kippur War. I didn't plan to stay in the military. As you know, in Israel, we have compulsory service for women as for men. We are the only country to have compulsory service for women. And I was making my plans to go and study. And then we have the Yom Kippur War. And during the war, I felt that the security of the state of Israel is in danger. As a matter of fact, the existence of the state of Israel is in danger. And I decided that I'm going to stay in the military because the most important thing for me is really the existence of the state of Israel. And then, which I did, by the way, and then 30 years later, I find myself very active and heavily involved in peace organizations in Israel after my retirement. And my decision was done exactly for the same reason, the safe existence of the state of Israel. Same motivation, different choices. 30 years later, I realized that there is no military solution for our conflict. And I realized that the only thing we can do is to try and to bring peace to our area. And the fact that I'm a woman, I think, may contribute to the success of those kind of negotiation between us and the Palestinians. I was asked yesterday by Ambassador Hunt, in what way can a woman contribute to peace, and in what way can a woman contribute to the being in the defense forces? I think that I found several ways that a woman can do it. I see, as opposed to our previous meetings, I see here some men in the audience. So I will try to be as politically correct as I can. You know, all women environment is a secure environment, talking about security. However, there are some, I would like to present a few examples for a possible contribution of women to the defense force. First of all is, I do believe that women are asking the right questions at the right time. I mean, engaging in military activities, I always find other women, as well as myself, asking, okay, and then what? After the military action, after the military operation, after a war, what exactly are the large strategic goals of this operation? And I found women asking those questions earlier than men and maybe preventing a few days, weeks, or months of war. The second thing is that I do believe that women are more willing. It's exactly like asking for direction in the road. They are more willing to seek for help. And I mean, if the situation is very bad and a country cannot really handle the situation and it's getting worse and worse and worse, so it could be a very good idea to seek for help outside, like international troops, like international involvement. I think that women find it easier sometimes, as in road instruction, to say, okay, this is the situation, we really cannot handle it, let's find other ways to solve it. And I have many other examples. If you would be interested, I would be willing to tell you about them, but then we have other colleagues here waiting for their turn. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you have your bios. I'll say about Senator Marta Lucia Ramirez that this is quite interesting. She's now a senator, of course, but she was the Minister of Foreign Trade under President Pastrana from 98 to 02. And then when President Uribe of a different political party was elected, she was named the defense minister for 2.5 years, 2002 and 2003. So this is the first minister in Colombian history to be part of one government and then appointed to a ministerial post in the second government. That must say a lot about her peace-building efforts, right? So please, Senator, tell us whatever is on your mind.
Okay, I would like to thank Ambassador Hunt for inviting me, and also to thank all of you for your interest in sharing with us some thoughts and, of course, our experiences. Ambassador Hunt recommended us to have a kind of symbolic or representation ideas about our goals and our professional career. And I would like to invite you to visualize the CNN images during last weekend when 2 Colombian hostages were released in the Colombian jungle. You probably remember Clara Rojas Consuelo Perdomo, 2 political women who were released by the guerrillas. And I also would like to ask you to visualize the image of Ingrid Betancourt. She is a former presidential candidate. She's still in the jungle. She has been kidnapped by the guerrilla for more than 6 years. These 3, by coincidence, they are 3 political women, but there are so many soldiers, policemen, politicians, common people from the civil society that were kidnapped, and they are still kidnapped by the Colombian guerrillas. 3 American military. So it was the reality in Colombia for so many years. The so-called Colombian guerrilla, the FARC guerrilla, and also the ELN guerrilla, they started almost 50 years ago when the Cuban guerrillas and some other Latin American guerrillas, and they started as a leftist groups. But unfortunately, during the 80s, they became very powerful. Why? Because of the narcotraffic money, because of narcotics. So every single cocaine that people uses is providing money for these kind of guerrillas in our country, these kind of terrorist groups. So when we were clear about this tragedy, we became more committed to fight against narcotics in our country. President Andrés Pastrana, who was very engaged in the peace process with the FARC, he failed in the peace process because the FARC was not interested in the process, but he started a very important strength of the military and the police in our country. And he also started a very important cooperation with the United States through the Plan Colombia in order to fight against narcotics and in order to strengthen our military and our police. As Ambassador Hunt has mentioned, I was a Minister of Foreign Trade on that government, and I have the honor to be appointed a Minister of Defense with President Uribe. So we continue the process of strengthening the military and the police, but we decided to change the concept of security. Why to change the concept of security? Because we were aware that we cannot have this concept of fighting against the guerrillas. Instead, we decided to have a concept of protect all the Colombian citizens, to provide protection, to have a more efficient state in order to provide protection to all the Colombian citizens. So that's why we start a policy trying to double the size of our army and our police, because we have a very big country. Colombian size is Spain, Germany, Switzerland, and France, all together, the same size. The Colombian size is double the Central American countries. Colombian size is almost 26 times of Israel land.
Sorry.
So that's why for us, for our state, for our public forces, it's so difficult to have the control of the state. That's why we decided to double the size of the army, but also to have a more integral concept of state presence in all the Colombian territory. We increase the judiciary presence in the territory. We increase education. We increase health services in so many places of the Colombian territory. And of course, we increase the military and police operations against the guerrillas in all the territory. In year 2002, we used to have almost 30,000 kidnapping every year, 30,000 people kidnapped by guerrillas. We used to have, 30,000 people homicides. And we used to have 3,000 people kidnapped. 3,000 kidnapping, 30,000 homicides. So we were clear that we need to protect people. We need to fight against kidnapping and against homicides through terrorism. And now we are having a very positive results, very good success. Last year, we still have kidnapping, unfortunately, but last year there were 460 kidnapping in our country. Compared with 3,000, we have reduced more than 70%. Last year, we had something like 18,000 homicides. It's still high, but it's almost 50% of the numbers that we had in year 2002. So this state control under the territory is creating a very positive attitude from the Colombians towards the institutions, towards the military and the police. It's creating this kind of I don't know how to say this, but this is, the Colombians feel proud of being a Colombian. We used to feel very bad, very embarrassed, because everybody was telling us that we were narco traffickers and whatever. So this kind of new proud to be in a country that can fight against this kind of violence is creating a very positive economic growth. Last year we had 6.5% of GDP growth. Investment is growing very much, job creation in all over the country. So what I have to say is that we are in this process of strengthening the Colombian state, increasing the legitimacy of the Colombian institutions and the Colombian democracy. Of course, we still have the guerrillas. As you saw the last weekend, they still want to threat not only people who are still kidnapped, but they also want to threat the Colombian state and the Colombian democracy, but they have less and less and less power each day. For me, it was a very important experience because it was the first time a woman had this position as a Minister of Defense. And we decided with President Uribe to create some different procedures in the military forces and also the police. Me, as a Minister of Defense, was in charge of both the police and the military forces. So we include indicators. Instead of having these body counts as a result of the military actions, we change for the increase of civil population protection, reduction of homicides, reduction of kidnapping. So it was a different concept instead of the body counts. I also decided to include new processes for the military expenditure, for the military budget. It was a very difficult task. Believe me, it was very, very difficult, but at the end of the day, our military, they accepted that we have this decision to provide more support to their activities, but that we were obliged to have a better and deeper civilian control under the armies and under their activities. So now we are improving also not only the security and the protection for citizens, but also the kind of civilian control under the military and under the police. I think that this is something that we accomplished, and this is not in discussion today. It was a big discussion 5 years ago. I had to suffer difficult moments, but now nobody discusses about this kind of control in their budgets and in their purchases. And we also create, excuse me.
It's so interesting that you were telling me earlier you came from a finance background and that you brought that financial expertise into your work as the Minister of Defense, which is what a civilian would do.
Yes, it was part of the of the experience, but a different. I'm sorry.
It happens to all of us. That's fine. That's fine.
Another change that we did, it was to increase the human rights training for the military forces. It was also important to have more protection to the citizens, but more legitimacy in our public forces. So also it was a little tough to include these human rights training and courses, and all the inspectors in the forces were obliged to present us the human rights results. So a different culture was starting, and now all these changes, I'm sorry. And now all these changes are part of the culture in our military and also in our police institutions. What is clear for us in Colombia is that security goes beyond the military. Security includes the judiciary. This is so important to have this integral state commitment with security. So judiciary, it's very important, and also the social part of the state. That's why education and labor and of course health in all the territory is part of this integral security strategy, which is giving Colombia a very positive results.
Thank you. Thank you. And now Ms. Jadou, Director General of International Affairs for President Abbas. You know, Oslo allowed the establishment of Palestinian TV. And Amal Jadou was a news broadcaster, and she was the very first Palestinian woman to appear on Palestinian TV. She is, we claim her as one of our local talent, because she was here at the Fletcher School. She's still finishing her doctorate there. But meanwhile, she has, in Palestine, become, what shall I say, a key advisor to the president. And you were with him in Annapolis, I believe. So tell us, please, anything from your experience that you think is particularly relevant to this whole question of women and security.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. And it is like homecoming for me to be in the Boston area and in Cambridge. In addition to being a student at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, I was a fellow at Harvard Law School. And actually, I attended many of the forums that were held here, but I was on the other side. And the first forum I attended was for a Knesset member, Yossi Beilin, and Yasser Abed Rabbo in 2001. And I remember at the time being annoyed with Yasser Abed Rabbo because I thought he didn't handle the questions very well, but I can understand the stress now. Well, to talk about security issue is not an easy issue for a Palestinian woman because there are different layers of insecurities that Palestinian women live under, and these are the Israeli occupation, but also internal issues that pertain to the Palestinian society itself. And when a Palestinian woman talks about security, we are immediately thinking of the absence of all forms of security. And it's a result of many problems. And so I decided to choose actually a story of 3 generations of women in order to really highlight the main issues that the Palestinian question deals with, and they actually very much connected to this absence of security. And I chose my family. I was born and raised in a refugee camp in the Bethlehem area. Originally, I come from Jerusalem, and the story of my grandmother's evacuation from her hometown, losing her status within the society, has left a major impact on my life and on my mother's life. So issues like the refugee issue was connected with that generation of my grandmother. And it meant a lack of security because she lost her homeland, she lost everything she owned, and she was wandering from one place to another until she settled in a refugee camp. And with the loss of home, it meant loss of the ability to have proper health, the ability to have proper education, and all sorts of things that are taken for granted to form the human security that we're talking about. The second generation is my mother's generation. My mother is the generation of the 1967 war. And my mother experienced the life of living under occupation. And she experienced the fact that their land is being taken from them, settlements are being built on their land, and imprisonment because she was active. She didn't want to be, she didn't want to live like anybody, under occupation. So they started resisting, and she was stopped in an Israeli station for a few days because she was resisting that. So with that, with my mom's experience, comes another dimension of the Israeli occupation and the absence of security. And the last generation is my generation, and it's the generation of the first Intifada. And with our generation comes the experience of the checkpoints, the wall, and more settlements, and cantonization, and being, closed in, walled in small areas and separated from each other. And the fact is that, not that each generation, their problems end and then the next generation faces new problems, but actually the problems that my grandmother faced, I face. And the problems that my mother faced, I'm also facing. So it's a continuation of all of these lack or absence of security. Also, I want to point out to the idea of the fact that security is over some kind of space, is guaranteed over some kind of a space. And if you notice, if you're able to imagine that my grandmother lived on a larger space, my mom lived on a smaller space, and now I'm living on a walled-in space, and so it's blocking on this security. This lack of security is becoming more and more valiant. It's in your face. It's becoming more obvious, and with that comes extremism and fundamentalism, which also leave their impact on Palestinian women. So the struggle of Palestinian women for emancipation and assuming their roles in their society becomes even harder because they have to deal with the issue of occupation that men and women suffer from, but also extremism that women suffer from even more. But the key element that I want, and it's the hopeful element, that really is, that goes through the thread of the story of these three women, is the persistent and actually overcoming victimhood. It doesn't mean that we're not victims anymore, but it means that we are able to make a meaning of our lives. But still, we need justice, and our question needs to be dealt with, and we need to find a solution to it. And this is why I joined the political life. I feel that I studied here negotiations. I feel that I have a place on the table, and that I want to contribute to reaching a settlement to our conflict, so that my daughters won't have to live the life that I've lived. Thank you.
One of the great experiences of this week has been the conversations between General Orhan and Ms. Chatou, as they've talked with each other about the meaning of security and also the experiences in their lives that have led them to this point, and the generations of the impact of the generations. And I hope that we'll have a chance for you all to say more about that. First, though, Ms. Froh from Afghanistan. What a woman. She became a social activist when she was 17. That's when she started her career. And, I said to her, are you from a very conservative family in Afghanistan? I mean, like, as if there are families right now in Afghanistan that we wouldn't consider conservative. So the society is such that there are tremendous, not just pressures, but I would say risks to be out there as much as you are. And you've described some of that to us in terms of the threats that you receive. Right now, she is working with the Women's Caucus in the parliament. Afghanistan has 27% of its parliament women, the Walesi Jirga. And she's also a team leader for a women's support group. And I was asking her back in the green room, what do you feel best about? And she said, it used to be that the age of, what do we call it, age of accountability, when you're considered an adult, majority we call it, it's when you can you stand trial as an adult. You can be penalized as an adult. For a boy, it was age 12. And for a girl, it was age 9. And she said, what I feel best about is that these women and I worked together, and we got it changed so that for a boy it's 18, for a girl it's 17. She said, they couldn't bear to make it equal, but such progress. So, security happens in small steps and in huge steps. And if you think about this broad concept and what it's like to be a 10-year-old girl, locked up in some really dreadful kind of prison, and being able to change that reality, that is a step toward security. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As Ambassador Swani at the beginning introduced human security, that's how most of the time when we talk about security, we really think of combats, the patrols on the streets and the tanks, which I had the same mentality 10 years back when I started my career as a writer for one of the newspapers in Pakistan. My mentality was on that time that women are vulnerable, they are oppressed, and they are only victims. But this mentality changed during my experience and during an experience that I'm going to tell you, a story that happened, that really changed the notion of what it means to be an Afghan woman. That most of the time what we hear in the media that Afghan women are passive, they have no agency, but they have. It's another issue that they are not portrayed in the media. So in 2003, when we were trying to do some provincial consultations at the provincial levels to gather people's inputs in order to shape the Afghanistan constitution. So I was also part of a group where we traveled. It was a group of male and female. So we traveled to one of the farthest areas of Afghanistan where for 8 months that province is closed because of the snow and because of the bad road conditions. And also to tell you that that province has full picture of division in terms of ethnicity, in terms of warlord factions, and there was a lot of tensions behind within that province. So the main group who were trying to gather that provincial consultation group and gather men and get their ideas, they had a very, very difficult time because they were not able to gather men from different ethnic groups, from different factions, to under one roof and be able to get their voices in terms of to be shaped, back feed into the constitution. So they told me that if we are having such a terrible time with men, I'm sure that you're not going to be able to gather women and get their inputs. So I went to the one of the, it's very common that in Afghanistan women work on the fields. They are out on the fields and they are working on the fields. So I had a discussion with around 10 women, and I said that I've come here in order to get your voices about the constitution of the country, and what I'm hearing is that it's impossible to gather women because you belong to different tribes and different factions, so I don't think that it would happen. She said that, you know what, even though we have, one of these women told me that even though we have these differences, but what is common between us, that we all lose our dear friends, dear family members in the war and the conflict that is happening. So that is something more appealing to us than the difference between ethnicity, difference between language and the factions. That was really appealing to me, and that really happened when I was able to gather 300 women and get their ideas from that province, and while our main group came up with no results from that. And that was the time, like in 2003, 5 years back, when my mind also changed in terms of that I'm working for women and having the mentality that they are vulnerable. And hearing about Afghan women, because I was in Pakistan as well, it's always that the media, the way it portrays that Afghan women are oppressed, they are vulnerable, and they have no agency, which is really not true most of the time. They have, but it's another issue that's not portrayed in the media. So that was the time when I actually started broadening my understanding of security, what it means to be secure for a woman. Just some months ago, I had a trip to the southern province of Afghanistan, Helmand, which is very famous for its insurgencies and all the chaos that's happening there. And also had some discussions with the women at the provincial councils, and they said that for us, insecurity means that 4 years back, we were able to go to school, but 4 years after this but after 4 years, we are not able to go to school. This is what insecurity means for us. So what I want to tell here that insecurity, it's really an issue of more than the combats, the patrols that we have, and we think that we are secure because we have checkpoints on the streets, because we have patrols, because we have tanks, but that is not the reality. We have to fight with rather than fighting on terrorism, I think it's fighting with poverty, fighting with war of drugs, which is another issue in Afghanistan. But, however, the condition of Afghanistan, you may all know that we have a central government, but at the same time, we are facing a lot of resistance, or I think it's more than that, where it comes to the killing of people. And even nowadays, what we have seen very common around the country is that women are being victimized by the Taliban, because for different reasons. Just 2 weeks ago, they beheaded 2 women because they said they were spies. Those women who weren't able to get out of homes, who were not able to even talk to a stranger because they will be accused of adultery and they would be stoned to death, which has happened many times in the country. So how can they dare to talk to a stranger? But they are being victimized and they are being attacked under different threats. What is so important for us women to understand that since we are being affected, since we are suffered at the front line, and even though we are not combating, but we are suffering, but we are able to influence this crisis, this war and conflict, and together, all of us, be it women of Palestine, be it women of Israel or Afghanistan, I think we all share the common goal, which is ensuring that security isn't all about the tanks and soldiers. It's about the ability to go to school. It's about the ability to get health and the ability to get food. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I see the head nodding and the winks for you from your fellow delegates that we have here. A member of parliament from Afghanistan, and another, the deputy minister, and so anyway, you've got a real cheering section here. Isn't it great to see the next generation that you get to hand the baton to? Well, what did you all hear from each other that you would like to comment on? I'm not going to try to structure this. Would you scoot back just a little so you all can see each other better? There.
I start?
Anyone?
Okay.
Please go ahead.
I think all these are very interesting experiences, and I would like to ask my fellows, what do you think about the international community participation in all these different realities, but difficult realities? How do you think the international community can provide better cooperation? Sometimes the war against drugs, for example. This is not a Colombian problem. This is not an Afghanistan problem. This is the entire world problem, which is consuming cocaine and drugs, and it's creating us this tragedy. How can the international community cooperate better with the Palestinian and Israel tragedy about terrorism? So I would like to hear some thoughts.
May I take a step on this one?
Sure.
Okay. Well, the international community has been, there is not one unified international community to start with. There are different positions, different stands when we talk about the international community. The culmination of an international community's position can be maybe deducted in one way if we look at United Nations resolution, UN resolutions. And there are many within the United Nations resolutions that support the Palestinians' rights, and they're there to support them. But the fact is there hasn't been any rigor steps really to implement those international UN resolutions. And with regard to the participation of women, we all know that there is UN Resolution 1325 that is very supportive of women's participation in negotiations. There are many attempts locally in Palestine with the International Women's Commission actually to push for more Palestinian women to be included on the Palestinian negotiating delegation. And so this is one example where actually the international community can push more. In general, if I'm to divide the international community's position into two positions, there is the majority of the countries of the world that have been very supportive. I mean, the latest Paris conference in support of the Palestinian Authority was a very clear indication of how much support there was for the Palestinian question and for Palestinians' nation building and strengthening the Palestinians in general. But there is one position here in the United States that has, for the past 8 years, taken very passive position and has not been involved. And now there is a change, or seems to be a change, that I hope there will be a more interactive role from this administration, hopefully, and the intention is, in President Bush's words, is to see a Palestinian state being established before he leaves office. I'm skeptical about that, but I really hope that this happens.
Just to add to Amal, that about the international community's support, especially on how women's voices are part of the peace processes and part of the conflict resolutions, I think we were fortunate that with the support of international community, Afghanistan was able to have 27% of women in the parliament. That is a huge achievement for us, and I think that it's really important to have that support continued, because as you have seen, the problem when it comes to women, a lot of us have similar problems, be it in Palestine, be it in Colombia, and be it in Afghanistan. Since we have common problems, and thanks to globalization, so this would really help us to have a common shared assistance from international community, especially something that we, the civil society of Afghanistan, are asking the international community of Afghanistan, the international community, to assist the government of Afghanistan to put pressure through its international conventions, that now the government is talking about negotiations with the Taliban government. And what we are trying to say that by negotiations, we shouldn't compromise. The fear is that there will be a compromise on women's rights, the way as it was during the Taliban government. And we ask, from the civil society of Afghanistan, I ask the international community to help us to put pressure through the international conventions and the international partnerships, that they shouldn't overlook the Constitution of Afghanistan, which really guarantees equality for women and men. And we are there from the civil society perspective to pursue it from the grassroots level. It's impossible to win this war without the international community's assistance, because it has spread so much like a disease. It's not only an Afghanistan's issue. You know that how is the situation in Pakistan, how is the situation, it will change other countries as well.
You know, this reminds me of a comment by one of the State Department higher-ups, who was also ambassador to two countries, and he said he had worked on a peace agreement, and he said in these peace agreements, he sees men forgive other men for what they do to women. But General, you started to make a comment.
First of all, I would like to address the question of the international involvement and the international law. International involvement in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. As I hinted before, I am in favor of this kind of international involvement. However, I would rather speak now about the Arab initiative. I think that the international involvement is very important. The support of the United States is essential. But the involvement of our neighbors in our neighborhood in the peace process, it is not less important. And since I can see in the crowd people making like this, I understand that you are aware of the Arab initiative. I think it's a very important initiative. It's the first time that the Arab countries were willing to acknowledge the state of Israel of course, in exchange of some kind of the establishment of a Palestinian state and other conditions. However, I think this is very important for the neighbors of the countries to be also involved in any peace process. This is one comment that I would like to raise. The second one is, I'm very glad that I'm here in Harvard, because whenever I appear in like television show, I feel like in a Hollywoodic, with my Palestinian colleagues and sometimes without them, I feel sometimes if I'm in a Hollywood movie. There are the bad guys, there are the good guys, and eventually something will happen and it will be an happy end. So there are bad guys, there are good guys in both sides. The situation is very complex. You cannot sum it up in one sentence or in one session. This conflict is going on for more than 100 years. It's not as if I'll say something nice, it will going to disappear. This is a real problem. This is a conflict going on about a very serious issue. Two nations are fighting on the same piece of land, which I really appreciate what you said about the size of it. You really cannot write the name of Israel on a globe. You have to write it on the sea, as the foreign minister of Israel said. So this is a real complex situation. And sometimes I think that you really cannot realize the kind of difficult decision you have to take. The wall is a very bad thing. What can I say? It's not nice. And whenever you take a photograph of the wall, it really looks very bad. However, it reduced the amount of the suicide bomber in the state of Israel significantly. And I would like to say something else. I really hate the thought, and I don't like to see it when I'm there in the West Bank, not in my uniform, in my civilian capacity. People stopped in the roadblocks. It's awful, really, and suffering. And sometimes it's not only just healthy people trying to get to their work. Sometimes it's even sick people trying to get to a hospital. I know it. I have seen it. However, just imagine the decision that some kind of an Israeli official has to make, even now, to remove a roadblock, and then 2 days later, a suicide bomber inside Israel is blowing himself. And what about the peace talks? They will stop immediately, by the way. We are going to endanger it. So now I want to get to my second point, is like where I think women can do better than men. I think that men are more willing to take risk with war than with peace. Peace is very risky, you know. You have to make concessions. You have to give up things that are important to you. However, peace will give you, on the long run, much more advantages. So I think women are willing to deal with this kind of risk-taking much more efficiently than men. And another thing that I would like to raise, the only thing that will help us here, because you really don't want to take those kinds of decisions. This is a very difficult decision. I hope that will not be forced to take those kinds of decisions, because it's, and the only option for it is when we'll have peace. And that's my last point that I would like to raise, is about the zero-sum game of security. Sometimes when I'm hearing people talking about it, as if it's more security for Israel, less security for the Palestinians. More security for the Palestinians, less security for Israel. It doesn't have to be this way. No, it doesn't have to be this way. It can be different. And the only way for it is just to really seriously work on this peace initiative that was started in Annapolis. Unfortunately, I share my colleague's view here, that the chances to get there within a year are what can I say? Really small, ambitious. But however, ambitious is the right word, thank you. But we have to be ambitious if we want to seek peace. Because every day that passes without reaching an agreement causes us many casualties. Thank you.
So this is what it's about. This is why we gather these women. It's time to turn to you. You have all kinds of questions and ideas, and there are 4 microphones. And we will rotate from one to the other. And remember that you state your name, and that you're supposed to be rushing up to the microphones now. Okay? You state your name, and you ask a question rather than making a statement.
My name is Arietta Chakos. I'm a mid-career in the master's program here at the Kennedy School. And thank you so much for this amazing, amazing panel. I'd like to ask all of you, how was it working together on these very difficult issues? And how did you come to the capacity to take in the viewpoint of the other side? Thank you.
I'm not the director. I'm just the moderator.
Well, thank you for the question. In fact, I mean, having lived under occupation, which is a reality on the ground, where there is an occupying power and an occupied people, is a reality that's there. And if we want to stay within this reality, it's not going to be helpful. We need to be able to find a way to really overcome that imbalance of power, where a force is using it's imposing its will on another nation. So the way, sitting here, I mean, I didn't know the general here until we've come to this place, and it hasn't been easy to really be sitting with her because, she's coming from the Israeli army, which is the army that I detest. It's the army that's occupying me, that is imposing 600 checkpoints in a tiny area of the West Bank in order to ensure the security, which checkpoints exist somewhat, like most of the times in areas where they're actually between 2 Palestinian cities or 2 Palestinian towns, and it doesn't make sense to me what security we're talking about when these checkpoints are there. And it is the IDF that's really building a wall inside on Palestinian line and not on the borders in order to ensure the security. If it was built on the 1967 borders, then fine with me. Then it ensures it is for security, but for me, it's mostly about land grab and actually taking over the water aquifers within the West Bank area. But meeting this woman and actually, talking with her and getting to know her experience and the choices that she made. I mean, I can easily connect with her because she's a woman. And she's a woman that had a cause. I mean, she believed in her country. But it's very difficult actually to accept. I mean, I can understand, I can relate, but it's very hard to accept, the actions of the IDF. But nevertheless, I have to say that if Palestinians want to really reach a settlement, we need to be working with people who know the system, who can affect and impact the system, and we need to be lobbying together as women and women who believe in peace, in a just peace for the 2 peoples. Then we need to be working together. And actually, we had a crazy idea of actually, the Palestinian women and the Palestinian Israeli lobbying each side's negotiators. So we will have more women on each side, because then we're more likely to have a solution. And hopefully there will be a woman in this country leading this country. So maybe that also will help. We'll have, maybe better options towards reaching a solution.
And would you like to add to that?
I think that this is one of the rare times when a Palestinian woman represents an Israeli woman. I do agree with Amal that the situation here, getting to know the people, really to know the people, and trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other side is very helpful to your cause. Because otherwise you cannot really negotiate. You cannot negotiate with those people. If you don't understand the terms that they are using, if you don't understand their condition, if you don't know what are the danger for them, you cannot really negotiate. It's true for the Palestinians, it's true for the Israelis, it's true everywhere in the world. And I think that we women have this ability to put ourselves in the other side position. And it makes a better negotiator, by the way.
Our Colombian friend yesterday, she said a very beautiful word that I really cannot repeat,
Maria
but she
Emma?
said, yes, she said that this is the platform where agendas are set, agendas for supporting women. And while coming from a country like Afghanistan, it is, on one hand, looking at the current situation of women there, it was quite hopeless for me. But when I see women like my colleagues here, my friends here, it really gives me and gives other colleagues and friends who have come far to this place and a real hope that by partnership we are not alone. We can work together, we can get out of the situation by being not alone. If we are one person confronting a situation, it's definitely that we will be targeted. But if we are a group of people, then it's definitely that we are going to influence, and they will be scared, those who are against us.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'd like to pick up on the idea of Ambassador Hunt's.
Yes, and who would you be?
Pete Wiley. And you said that inclusiveness is an important part of negotiation, and I would add equality. And I think that, as an American, that's been our experience with civil rights, the civil rights movement. I don't think we would have had the civil peace without it. But that doesn't always work. The state of Israel does not see itself as a country of equal rights. It's a country of one people on top, and necessarily the other people are on the bottom. And thus they've had war, and they'll always have war. They're a country that oppresses the Arabs, sitting in the middle of the Middle East, in the middle of the Arab world. Why would they think that they would ever have peace on that basis? So I have a question for General Iran. Do you think that Israel will ever get peace through equal rights? Be a country, not a Jewish state, but simply a country of the people who live there. Thank you.
Before I turn it over to the general, I want to quote what another one of the women in this delegation said, which actually made a lot of sense to me. And she also had a military career of, I believe, 28 years. And she was talking about David and Goliath. And she said, you know, Israel used to be David, and the Arab states around were Goliath. And then that got switched. And now we became Goliath against the David. And that was a very, very interesting and helpful image for me to understand. But please.
Thank you for your question. Although I don't share your assumptions, I would be happy to answer it. I think that starting the history of Israel and the history of the Jewish people in '67 would be a mistake for all the students here. there was an idea behind the establishing of the State of Israel in 1948. The Jewish people all over the world, we didn't have any country that we can live safely within. And the idea of the establishing of the Jewish state, which was approved in the UN and by the international community, is that the Jewish people are entitled to their own country. And this is the whole idea behind the establishing of the State of Israel. And
Would you object if other
Wait,
countries...
I would rather let her finish. That's our
Thank you.
protocol here.
And we established in a very hostile neighborhood a Jewish state that should be a safe place for Jews all over the world. And we are trying to do it for the last almost 60 years, and it's not a very easy task. And we are trying to do it in very hard and difficult circumstances because we are also the only democracy in the area. So it's not very easy. The fact that you are aware of the injustice done in Israel is because we have a free press and we are a democracy. I'm sure that you are not so informative about other countries in the area about those kind of actions. However, I do believe that Israel is a state for the Jewish people. It should be a state of the Jewish people. I'm not in the position to raise our history, especially in the 20th century. I don't want to do it. It's not a competition of suffering. I strongly believe that the Jewish people, as any other people, they deserve their own country. And this is the reason for us to establish this country. I do believe that we seek for peace because we don't want to fight all the time. And I don't accept your assumption about superiority and inferiority. We really are seeking for peace with our neighbors. We really are in favor. More than almost 80% of the Israeli public is more than willing for establishment of a Palestinian state. And so we are really in favor of a Palestinian state in the side of the state of Israel, living in peace with us. And I hope it will happen. The only thing that I am afraid of, that some people are like preaching for a one-state solution. One-state solution is the end of the state of Israel, because there will be a majority of Arabs, and I do want to live in a democratic state. So the choice is very tough. We want to live in a Jewish state, a state for the Jewish people, and a democratic state that has a majority of a Jewish people. Otherwise, there is no point in the establishment of the Jewish state, Israel. We can as well continuing to stay as Ahmadinejad wishes for us, go back to Europe or maybe stay in the United States. Thank you very much.
Shall that be the model
And
for all
Emmanuel,
countries around the
excuse
world?
me,
Cleanse people that we don't
excuse
want?
me, we would do one question and then a response. Yes.
My name is Emmanuel Arnaud. I'm a second-year MPP student at the Kennedy School. I'd like to thank all the members of the panel, and I'd like to ask them the following question. Suppose you became the head of state of your respective countries. What would be the two very significant measures that you would take which you believe a male head of state would not take? Thank you.
How about this? As soon as you think of one, speak out. Like, don't wait until you've got the two, and then.
I will ensure that the Constitution of Afghanistan is actually enforced. Because if the Constitution of my country is enforced, then I will not have a problem as a woman, and no woman of Afghanistan will have any problem or any issues with.
First, I will continue strengthening the Colombian state in order to provide better protection for citizens. At second, I will try to have a peace solution, a peace process with the leftist movement that we still have.
Well, the thing is that I don't aspire to be a president of my country. I really, yeah.
Big mistake.
No, I really, thank you. I really can see myself as foreign minister of my country, but not a president. But if I were ever to become a president, and bearing in mind or assuming that the situation of occupation is still there, I would definitely organize for a nonviolent movement to struggle against occupation.
I'm speechless.
So the question is, what would you do that you don't think a man would do?
Yes, once you're head of Israel.
Right.
I don't know. I would really make an action plan that will execute the directive that was given in Annapolis to try to reach an agreement, because the political situation in Israel now is very unique, and it is a great opportunity for making peace, because it's something to do with as I mentioned before, we are a democracy, and the coalition now is very strong. And so this is the only chance that I can see in the last 10 years that we can really reach an agreement. So he has to be courageous and to work on the peace agreement with President Abbas very seriously. And I think there is, although the chances are not very high, but we can, to reach an agreement within a year, but I think we can do it. So he should continue and make an effort to reach this kind of an agreement.
Yeah, but it's you. You're the president. You're the prime minister here in this scenario. So what would you do that the prime minister...
First of all, I would like to achieve the first stage of the roadmap. And the people that know about the roadmap will have to open and to see the first stage.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to add to that question? It's a great question, Manuel.
Probably I would like to add something in the Colombian case. You have mentioned that in your country, in Palestine, you have 3 generations suffering with all this situation. We in Colombia, we have 5 generations suffering with the terrorism from guerrillas. So I think it's a priority to create a sense of future for youth, a sense of a permission in the future for our youth, because we cannot leave one generation and the other one in the same, focus in the same terrorist conflict, in the same terrorist problem in our country. So the sense of future.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Jed Schwartz, a question for Ms. Jadou and General Oren. During at the end of World War I, there was a ceasefire set up so that at a certain time, no further shots would be fired. And the question is, I understand you need you to speculate because it has to do with the relationship between the Hamas and Mr. Hania and the Omer government. I mean, this ceasefire, or apparently putative ceasefire, broke down just today or yesterday, and the shelling continued, and the Israelis went in into Gaza, and then Mr. Abbas said, "This is outrageous, and this is a setback for peace." But why then didn't they say, we're going to have a hudna or a ceasefire or whatever, and say, okay, at 12 o'clock tomorrow, no more rockets will be fired, and the Israelis won't, and then what they do is they start shooting until 12 o'clock, and then at 12 o'clock they stop shooting. Why? It seems so easy, but it isn't. It must not be. So why do you think they haven't done that?
Okay.
Are you having a good time?
Yes, I enjoy every moment. first of all, as you all know, Israel withdrew from Gaza Strip unilaterally, and a few months later, the Hamas party won the election. So Israel troops are not inside Gaza Strip, they are outside Gaza Strip. And the government that rules the Gaza Strip is the government ruled is the Hamas government, which didn't accept the quartet condition, which means they don't acknowledge of the state of Israel. They are not committed to any agreement that was signed with Israel before. And okay, you are familiar with it, I will not continue with it. Israel is not dealing now with the Hamas. This is the official position of the Israeli government. Israel is dealing with President Abbas, which is in the West Bank. Unfortunately, the violence now is happening mostly in Gaza Strip. We are not there now. They are shooting rockets on the Israeli towns and kibbutz. And for the last 4 years, since the withdrawal, more than 2,000 rockets were shot on the towns of Israel. This is the situation. And of course, always there is an Israeli retaliation inside Gaza. The last of them was yesterday. It's shooting, retaliation, shooting, retaliation. The Hamas is not willing to deal with the state of Israel. They are not willing to negotiate. There are talks about, formally. This is the formal position, not only of Ismail Haniyeh, also of Mash'al, that sits in Damascus. I hope that everybody is familiar with the names. This is the formal position. If you are asking me, we should seek to some kind of an agreement, to some kind of a ceasefire. However, we are dealing here, the Israeli position is very delicate. We are dealing here with two entities. One entity is the Hamas in Gaza, and the other entity is the legitimate Palestinian government that sits in Ramallah. And first of all, there were some attempts to make some kind of an unity government inside Palestine. So the government will represent the Hamas and the Fatah as well. But this broke, as you know, events that took place a few months ago, a year ago?
In June.
In June. So this is the situation now. It's exactly with whom do you want us to talk? We talk with Abu Mazen. No, this is a rhetoric question. If you will talk with Abu Mazen, does he have the power in Gaza Strip to enforce the Hamas not to shoot rockets on Israel? You know the answer. If you will talk to the Hamas leaders, what about the peace talks with Abu Mazen? This is a very delicate situation here. Political situation in the West Bank and Gaza, and we need to operate very carefully in this situation.
Thank you. Yes, Anne.
I'm Ann Manning. I'm a mid-career here at the Kennedy School, and I've been taking this class in the last, 2 months, 2 weeks. It's been fabulous. You have a room full of activists here who are very interested in this topic. If we all went home and accessed our pretty darn good email list tonight, what would you like the world that we can access to know about what your average citizen can do to bring about more inclusive security so that we get more human security? Thank you.
I think something which is very important for the world and for the world and everyone else to understand that when we talk about security, it's not only security of soldiers and tanks and fighting on the streets. It's actually human security, and we need to understand. If we are able to understand and this is a message that I want to give to the world, that it's the women who understand because they suffer. So that if the voices of women, if their ideas are part of the peace processes, if their voices are part of the national security plan as well as international plans, I'm sure that we will be able to live in a secure world. Women can make difference. One woman can also make difference, as we have seen in our experiences. That's the message that I want to give to the whole world.
And is there an action that you imagine, to the other speakers, is there an action that you can imagine that the normal citizens can take? Can you give us some sense, like Al Gore, when we watched An Inconvenient Truth, I went home and planted 4 trees. So, and we already had a yard full of trees. So can you give us something here?
Actually, lobbying and working for women's rights in the places where women don't have their rights is one way where women can help. Supporting NGOs that work for women's rights is another thing across the world. I think also, I've been pondering this crazy idea. I mean, the world in the United Nations has Security Council. And the Security Council was established in the wake of the Second World War. And those participating in its establishment were basically men, and actually winners of the Second World War. And my idea is to, have, I think, a peace council. And the idea should come from the women, and we should be together lobbying for a peace council where women can have a better perspective for our world, and whereby all nations on this earth are represented. So, I mean, it's just an idea to raise discourse about how women really view this world and view the future of the globe that we're living in.
As I mentioned before, in the case of Colombia, I believe that we cannot choose between the strength of the state or a peace process. I believe that we need both the strength of the state and the peace process. And if we can have both, I think it's important to work in some different and complementary areas. Better education for young people creates opportunities for job creation for all of them. Better education provides opportunities for all of them to be entrepreneurs. Better opportunities of innovation in science and technology is something which is quite important for young people, and sometimes they are focused in the survival, they are focused in not being kidnapped instead of focusing having more scientific learning or technology learning. And I also believe that we have to include in more international participation from our people, from our youth in all this globalization process.
Thank you. Yeah. I thought you talked more than you wanted. Go ahead.
Yeah, much more, but I have an idea, so maybe.
Yes.
And it has to do with a story. Few years, I'm one of the creators of the Geneva Initiative. So one evening I was sitting minding my own business, and I got a telephone call from somebody from Geneva. We need you urgently to go to to Sweden and Norway, and some kind of a delegation with Yasser Abu-Drabo and our Palestinian friend. And I said, how comes that you just, it's like in a few days, how comes that you just called me? He said, because those countries refuse to accept delegations that they don't have a woman. So my version of the tree that you planted, after seeing I think that the UN and other countries, influential countries, should pass a law that whenever they are dealing with other countries' delegation on this kind of matters, it should be a certain proportion of women there. Otherwise, they will not deal with them.
Cool. Thank you. And I wish I could take your questions. We can't. I'm so sorry. I will add to that, and two small answers. The U.S. has, in fact, as part of the G8, as well as part of the UN, but as part of the G8, adopted a measure that says that women must be fully represented in every part of the peace process. So the U.S. is on record and yet not implementing this. And so everyone here has a congressperson, everyone here has a senator, and I promise you that 90% of them have never heard of this, but if you go, let's see, we'll just say go online to the Women in Public Policy program, and we will make sure as of 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, we have a copy of that G8 agreement up there and the UN Security Council resolution so that you can then copy that and send it to your Congress people. And then second, Women for Women International is a great, great organization. They work in conflict areas and specifically on this issue of elevating women's voices. They have tens of thousands of women, primarily in the United States, who are linked up with individual women. And then look up the Global Fund for Women. And they work on women's rights in 162 countries around the world. I have a little prompt here. So the Global Fund for Women, Women for Women International, and then the Women in Public Policy Program website to get the G8 resolution and the UN Security Council resolution. And remember, the US is on the Security Council. So I have heard four strands here, just to wrap up, to bring them together into the tapestry. I have heard descriptions of women's needs. I have heard ideas about women's participation, how to increase women's participation in meeting those needs through a peace process. I've also heard four women's perspectives on war and peace, and I have seen magnificent leadership of women. And so now I would like to ask those other women leaders who are here for this colloquium, including our Iraqi friends who've just arrived, if you would please stand and be part of the applause that we would like to give to all of you. You're welcome to a reception now in honor of our women leaders, and thank you all so much for being here.